"You've always been so unambitious, Emily," my father said, his voice cutting through the hum of Sunday dinner. "Not everyone's meant for the big leagues, and that's fine, but leave the real work to people like your brother." I set my fork down carefully, palms trembling beneath the table. "Except for you, Dad," I said evenly, meeting his eyes. "My unambitious self happens to be the only other person at this table with a track record of success." Nathan's smirk spread slow, the same infuriating grin I'd seen since childhood, the expression of someone born believing the world would always bend for him. "My name is Emily Rowan Whitaker, and back when all this began, I was the invisible middle child in a Seattle dynasty where success meant press coverage, luxury cars, and a last name printed in gold. My father, Thomas Whitaker, had built one of the Pacific Northwest's most powerful real estate empires. My older brother, Nathan, was the heir apparent. Reckless, wasteful, and still the favored one. My younger sister, Ava, was the family darling, living off brand deals and brunch reservations. And me, quiet, dependable, forgettable. Dinner moved on without me. Nathan bragged about closing a downtown project, though I'd overheard at the last company event that the deal was failing. Dad beamed at him, feeding the ego he'd raised like a prize-winning horse. Ava chimed in with stories about parties and sponsors. I stayed silent, pushing my food around, wondering why I kept coming back to these dinners that always ended with me feeling smaller than when I arrived. When I was younger, I tried everything to earn their respect. Graduated near the top of my class, took every internship I could find, worked nights while they slept, but no matter what I achieved, it was never enough. "You're too quiet," Dad used to tell me. "You don't have the killer instinct for this business." It didn't matter that I consistently outperformed my peers. He and Nathan had already decided who I was, a soft voice in a loud world. A few years later, during one of the company's weekly strategy meetings, the truth crystallized. The conference room looked out over Elliott Bay, glass walls reflecting a skyline my father practically owned. Around the table sat the same inner circle: Dad, Nathan, and a handful of executives pretending to listen. That day, I had come prepared. A full redevelopment plan for a failing property in Tacoma. Weeks of research, financial modeling, demographic analysis, all of it packed neatly in a binder on my lap. When the time came, I stood and began. "I believe if we repurpose the Tacoma site into mixed-use residential," Nathan interrupted without missing a beat. "That site's a lost cause," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We've already sunk too much into it." "I've run numbers that prove otherwise." I started again, but Dad waved me off. "If Nathan says it's not worth it, then it's not worth it. Next item." And just like that, my proposal died. I sat back down, face burning. No one met my eyes, my carefully crafted work, weeks of effort, erased by a hand gesture. That night, I went home to my small apartment overlooking the Sound. The city shimmered outside, vibrant and alive. Everything my world inside was not. That's when the decision hit me. Quiet, cold, final. If they wouldn't hear me inside their company, I'd build my own. I didn't quit right away. That would have drawn too much attention. Instead, I started small. I worked late, saved quietly, and watched for forgotten corners of the city no one else wanted. My first project was a beat-up duplex in Rainier Valley. It was all I could afford. The paint peeled. The plumbing hissed like a wounded animal. But when I looked at it, I saw a possibility. On weekends, I painted walls until my hands cramped. I fixed light fixtures. I learned property codes from YouTube. Neighbors probably thought I was crazy. But 1 year later, I sold the duplex for a modest profit. My first win. It wasn't much money, but it was proof that I could build something without their approval. That profit became seed money. The seed became a plan. And the plan became the start of everything. Over the next few years, I scouted undervalued properties all across Seattle, places other investors dismissed as hopeless. Abandoned triplexes, half-finished condos, forgotten office parks, swallowed by weeds. During that time, I met Grace Park, a sharp-eyed investor introduced through a mutual friend. Grace was everything I wasn't: fearless, outspoken, magnetic. She'd walked away from a corporate finance career because she hated being told what she couldn't do. We clicked immediately. She saw value where others saw risk. More importantly, she saw me. Together we founded Rowan & Park Investments, a name with no trace of Whitaker. We started quietly. A duplex here, a small commercial strip there. I handled strategy, data, and projections. Grace handled negotiations, press, and networking. One property at a time, we built momentum. Within 3 years, our portfolio grew from side hustle to serious contender. Residential complexes, boutique office spaces, and prime retail along Capitol Hill and South Lake Union. The irony. My father and Nathan never noticed. They were too busy chasing flashy downtown skyscrapers while ignoring the neighborhoods that actually made Seattle breathe. Every time they wrote off a project as unprofitable, I'd buy it quietly through a holding company. Then Grace and I would turn it around and make it sing. Each win was its own quiet rebellion. By the time I turned 30, Rowan & Park was thriving, profitable, respected, and expanding beyond Washington. We weren't just surviving, we were competing. And the best part, they still had no idea. Grace and I built a system of anonymity. She was the face of the company. Charismatic, brilliant, loved by investors and the press. I stayed behind the curtain, orchestrating every move. To the world, Grace Park was a visionary founder, transforming neglected spaces into opportunity. To those who really knew, I was the strategist making it all work. It wasn't about hiding, it was about freedom, operating without the weight of the Whitaker name, without their judgment. Every deal closed was another quiet, "I told you so." Every success, another reminder that I didn't need their seat at the table, I'd built my own. Every family gathering felt like a rerun I couldn't turn off. Dad would spear a piece of steak like it owed him money and ask, "When's the last time you even stepped foot in the office, Emily?" He never waited for an answer. For someone with shares, you do a spectacular job of staying invisible. Nathan always supplied the punchline. Not that anyone's missing her brilliant contributions. He'd laugh at his own joke. Ava would smile without looking up from her phone. They thought my distance proved them right. It was, in truth, how I kept my sanity. I'd stopped going to the tower unless a shareholder meeting legally required it. Every other visit taught the same lesson. Presence without respect is just another way to be ignored. Meanwhile, Rowan & Park learned to run on 2 perfectly tuned engines. From day one, Grace and I decided she would take the spotlight. I would build the map. Not because I was hiding, because it was the optimal use of our strengths. She was kinetic in a room. Handshake, eye contact, pitch that cut clean. I was patient behind glass. Models, risk ladders, timelines that landed exactly on time. The choice paid off. Press called her Seattle's quiet storm. The visionary who turns dust into diamonds. Our site banners showed her hard hat and smile. My name was nowhere. Not on the website, not in the annual report, not in the media kits investors flipped through on airplanes. Only a handful of trusted partners knew the whole layout. I made the calls others didn't see, which meant I moved without interference, especially from the family who mistook my silence for surrender. To Whitaker Properties, Rowan & Park was a tidy little competitor nibbling at the edges. What they didn't know was that every edge was a fault line we had mapped months in advance. Every time they dismissed me in a dining room or boardroom, we acquired something they had already decided wasn't worth saving and made it sing. "You've been at this all day," Grace said, setting 2 coffees on my desk and leaning into the doorway like she had minutes to spare and intended to spend them on me. I kept scanning the dashboard graphs. "Every quarter we beat the last one. There's an office block in South Lake Union, underleased, overlooked, but the floor plates are perfect. If we restructure the tenancy mix and fix the HVAC, absorption turns positive in 6 months." She arched an eyebrow. "Let me guess, every big player wrote it off, and you've already run 3 scenarios for turning it into a goldmine." 4, I said, unable to hide a small grin. Grace laughed softly, then watched me for a beat. "You know it's a matter of time before your family connects Rowan & Park to you." "Maybe," I said, turning the screen toward her. "By the time they do, it won't matter." She slid 1 coffee closer. "You're not chasing their approval anymore, are you?" I stared at the tiny ascending lines that represented months of second chances we'd given to forgotten buildings. "No," I said, "I'm not." We tapped paper cups like a quiet toast to building something incredible for reasons that needed no stage. And beneath the hum of the office, I felt the sturdier frequency I'd learned to trust. Proof accumulating, not in applause, but in results that didn't care who got the credit. "I don't like galas. My family collects them." Grace tossed a black dress onto my couch anyway. "You've earned 1 night to celebrate. Also, I'm invested in the educational value of certain facial expressions. I rolled my eyes, but I went. The ballroom at the Four Seasons spilled light like champagne, chandeliers, white linen, the soft clink of cutlery over conversations that sounded rich, even when people said nothing. My father and Nathan were exactly where I knew they'd be. Front tables, cameras nearby, handshakes staged with practiced warmth. When Nathan spotted me, he tilted his head. Well, look who crawled out of the archives. Events like this are usually for people who contribute. Be nice, Dad murmured, straightening his tie without looking at me. Just try not to embarrass us. I gave them a polite, neutral smile and disappeared into the back half of the room where Grace had claimed a table near the service doors, the only place people left you alone long enough to breathe. Awards began to roll out, names I recognized, some I respected. Not Whitaker, not yet. I watched Dad's jaw grind smaller with each announcement. Nathan's smile thinned to a line. Then the host lifted the last envelope, the one that always carried the headline. For unparalleled innovation and excellence in the real estate sector, this year's award goes to... A scripted pause, then a clear ring. Rowan & Park. Sound arrived in a wave. Applause, chatter, chairs scraping. Grace squeezed my hand under the table, steady and delighted. Across the room, my father's confusion slid into something closer to anger. Nathan went blank, like a feed drop. Grace rose, and the room rotated to face her. She moved like the stage had been waiting for her weight. When the trophy touched her hands, the applause settled into listening. "Thank you," she said, voice warm and sure. "When we started Rowan & Park, we set out to find value where others saw none, to build not just properties, but opportunities." Polite applause. Cameras. Dad stared straight ahead. Nathan's knee jiggled under the table. Then Grace shifted, and the air followed. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about the person who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, the mind that has driven every risk we took and every win we earned." The room quieted. You could hear the soft ring of glassware settling on saucers. "She prefers the background," Grace continued, eyes sweeping the crowd until they found me. "But none of this exists without her. My partner and closest confidant, Emily Rowan Whitaker." Silence landed like a dropped veil, then broke into 100 whispers. Heads turned, first curious, then surprised, then calculating. At the front table, my father's expression locked. Nathan's mouth opened and forgot what to say. Grace extended a hand toward me, palm up, patient and certain. "Emily, come join me. This moment is yours as much as it is mine." For a breath, my body forgot how to move. Then I stood, heels against marble. A short walkway that felt like a long road. And the light, bright enough to erase doubt, met me where I had always refused to meet it. Up close, the trophy was heavier than it looked, cold through the skin of my palm. Grace's hand settled on my shoulder, not to anchor me, but to say I didn't need anchoring anymore. She angled the mic. "If you haven't heard of her yet," she said, smiling, "trust me, you will." Applause rose in clean, thundering lines. For years, I'd imagined what recognition might feel like, and always pictured a crowd. It turned out to feel quieter than that, like a long argument inside me had finally ended. Grace's fingers gave a small squeeze. "Say something," she whispered, a laugh tucked into the edge of her voice. I stepped to the microphone and found my balance in a sentence I knew to be true. "Thank you. When we started Rowan & Park, we took chances. On ideas others ignored, on properties others dismissed, and on ourselves. Tonight proves those chances were worth it." A ripple of applause rolled and paused. I held the room a second longer. "To everyone who believed in us, thank you. And to those who didn't." I let the smallest smile rise. "Thank you, too. You gave us the fuel to succeed." Laughter, real, surprised, broke the tension. Applause chased it. Somewhere near the front, a chair leg scraped sharply against the floor. I didn't look. I didn't need to. When the lights shifted and the program moved on, Grace and I stepped down together. On the walk back to our table, people I'd never met reached out. Congratulations, cards, invitations to call. I nodded, grateful, still hearing the echo of my own voice coming back to me without anyone else's filter on it. At the front tables, my family became the still point in a moving room. My father sat with his hands folded too neatly, a pose he used when he needed to. Looked composed faster than he could feel it. Nathan leaned toward him and said something that burned the edges of his mouth. Ava sipped her wine and watched like it was a show she didn't want to admit she was enjoying. "They'll come around," Grace said softly. "Maybe not tonight, maybe not the way you want, but the math won't go away." I exhaled and realized there was nothing in me reaching toward them anymore. "Maybe," I said. "Either way, it doesn't change what we built." The ceremony dissolved into networking. The room thinned, then emptied in slick currents toward the elevators. I knew what was coming before I saw him stand. My father, buttoning his jacket like armor, walking toward our table with Nathan a few paces behind. Grace rose to greet him, measured and gracious. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, offering her hand. "It's an honor." He shook it, the movement tight. "Likewise." His eyes cut to me. "Emily, we need to talk." Nathan let out a short, humorless breath. "What's there to talk about?" "She's been undermining the family business behind our backs." Grace didn't blink. "Undermining. She's been doing what leadership looks like when it isn't afraid to be wrong." "Enough," my father said, without looking at him. Then to me, quieter. "Can we step outside? Just the two of us." The terrace air was a relief after the ballroom heat, cool and edged with the smell of the bay. We stood at the railing, city lights arranging themselves like truths no one could edit. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice had lost the clean, hard angles he used at work. "I didn't know. I kept my eyes on the skyline." "That's because you didn't look." He nodded once like he'd expected me to say it and had no argument prepared. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "This business is brutal." "From what?" I asked. "From failing or from proving you wrong?" The question hung between us, simple and impossible. He closed his eyes a moment, then opened them with something like honesty in them. "I was wrong," he said. Tonight made that impossible to deny. We stood there until the cold asked us to choose between comfort and truth. When we turned back toward the ballroom, I realized I didn't need anything from the conversation that hadn't already been said. The night wind off Elliott Bay was sharp enough to cut through silk. My father stood with his hands braced on the railing, shoulders squared like he was still in a boardroom. For the first time in my life, he looked unsure. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I had no idea you were capable of all this." "That's because you never cared to find out." He nodded, eyes fixed on the skyline instead of me. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" "From proving you wrong." He swallowed hard. "From failing. This business is brutal, Emily. I didn't think you had the drive, the brains, the guts." His silence was answer enough. Finally, he said, "I was wrong." The words landed like the first crack in concrete. For a long moment, we just stood there, city lights reflecting off the bay like broken glass. Then he exhaled. "Whatever happens next, you've earned my respect. You don't need my approval anymore." I turned toward him. "You're right. I don't." He gave a small, tired smile, the kind people make when they realize control has slipped for good. 2 days later, he showed up at our office. Grace was already in the conference room, calm, collected, ready for anything. Dad arrived exactly on time, suit pressed, briefcase polished. "Emily, Grace," he began, setting the case on the table. "I spoke with the board. We'd like to acquire Rowan and Park. Bring your expertise under the Whitaker umbrella. The offer is generous." Grace's face didn't move, but her eyes flicked to mine. "That's flattering, Mr. Whitaker," she said smoothly. "But Emily should answer." "I didn't even touch the folder." "No." His brow furrowed. "At least look at it." "No." My voice didn't rise. "I built this with my own hands. I'm not selling it to the company that never saw me." He stared for a long second, realizing there was nothing left to argue. Finally, he closed the folder, straightened, and said softly, "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." When the door closed behind him, Grace let out a slow breath. "You okay?" I smiled. Better than okay. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval, money, or revenge. I'd already won the only battle that mattered, the one against doubt. Morning spilled through the glass walls, painting the office gold. Grace perched on the edge of my desk, coffee in hand. "You realize what just happened, right? The Whitakers tried to buy us. That means we've arrived." I looked out at the skyline, the same skyline I used to watch from my apartment window, wondering if there would ever be space for me in it. Now there was. "I'd built it." "Yeah," I said quietly. "We have." Grace grinned. "So what's next?" I thought of all the buildings still standing empty, All the stories still waiting to start. We keep building, I said. Not bigger, better. She raised her cup. To building better. I lifted mine. To building free. As the city woke beneath us, I felt lighter than I ever had. My name no longer needed a family empire to stand tall. It already did.